Hello. We few but mighty. Rock on. We'll make it work. I'm gonna give it another minute or two, see how many people sign on. If it's just 5 of you, that's like a third of the class. So much there's a point to us doing activities, for example. I can finish the lecture. Well, while we're waiting, I can tell you I do have good news, which is I am allowed to go back to teaching in person on Monday. So we will be back in person in Roop on Monday. The other thing I want to say, I'm going to try and find us a computer lab for a part of Monday because I'd like to teach you how to do some basic stuff on SPSS. But if I can't get one, I'm going to send an email about this and have you all, if you have a laptop, bring one, and hopefully we'll have enough people that can like share them amongst themselves to be able to take a look at SPSS together. So looks like this is who we're gonna have for today. You know what I'll do? I'll finish the lecture and then I'll let you all go super early. How's that sound? But I do want to get through the rest of the lecture material. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we will have to see, just based on how Monday goes, we may have to push the exam back to next Friday. But thank you to the 5 of you for being here. I very much appreciate it. I don't know if it's because it's homecoming, people are just like, nah, it's skip day or what, but my previous class was fairly light too. So if you remember, we were talking about the types of cognitive ability tests, the types of educational tests in general. So we are going to talk about the GRE. One of the things I was going to have you all do today in groups was to actually take some questions from the GRE. But obviously, if we only have enough people for one group, there's not really a point to that. So we will do that on Monday. So you'll do that. And then that is something that will be sort of your first assessment for the assessment report you'll do with your partner. So we'll figure out partners on Monday as well. So the GRE it has 3 different sections: verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing. And this scoring has changed since this last edition of your book. So let me make sure I actually get you all the accurate one here in terms of what the GRE scoring looks like now. How the GRE is scored. Based on the number of correct responses to all the answers. Okay, this is not that helpful. Understanding your scores, that's what we need. Interpreting your GRE scores. Hey. All right, so as you can see, they shifted it to this bizarre thing. And let me go ahead and zoom in, where now it's on this like mean of 150 for some reason, instead of being on the SAT scoring we're all used to. And so you can see here are some mean test scores for various subfields, for example. Okay. But I am just going to real quick do a quick screenshot of this so that I can flop it into the PowerPoint. All right. Go back to the PowerPoint. And not in that range anymore. And what I'll do, I'll just make this its own slide. There we go. So now we know what the GRE means look like. Okay. It does have a floating mean and standard deviation, as you could see. So like good scores could be around 150 or, you know, totally different. So certainly, again, a little bit different, a little bit distinct to what we had been looking at. You could also, there are also GRE subtests. Go ahead and throw the captions back on here. So the GRE subtests look at things like this you're going to go into grad school for. These, as far as I know, are still on the normal scale. And these, at least when I took it, were still paper and pencil measures. They weren't on the computer like the normal GRE. So I'm also realizing as I'm talking to you all that I apparently skipped ahead a whole bunch of slides because I was like, I wasn't on the GRE. So thank you all for hanging with me for a second. So we had talked about the No Child Left Behind Act. We had talked about these different types of survey batteries. I think we were starting to talk about some of the specific ways these things are used. So I'm going to bop back here. And again, thank you all for hanging in with me. Apparently, it's just a weird day for everybody. So why do we do these achievement tests? Well, they can help a student or those around them affect their strengths and weakness and identify their strengths and weaknesses, figure out where they might need to get tutoring or something along those lines. Classroom, school, or school system profile reports can help people figure out how in general students are doing at those grade levels. And again, it's that success towards adequate yearly progress for, again, both the students, but also say the whole class or the whole grade. All right, so now we're going to get into specific tests, and we're going to start with the, I don't know if you pronounce this NAEP or NEEP. I'm going to guess NEEP just because the Michigan version, which I took a lot, was pronounced the MEEP. So this was the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This was not used for No Child Left Behind. It was to compare states to one another. It's called the National Report Card. And all states are required to participate every 2 years and looking at math and reading in particular. And sometimes there are other subjects. I think I remember taking like a science one of these at one point. And typically they do it at the 4th and the 8th grade levels. And in your book on page 161, there is a picture that shows you what it actually looks like when they show this nation's report card. So they compare all the different states to each other. They show overall data, etc. The data that they show is for 2017. And in particular, they're looking at Virginia, again, because your first author teaches at ODU. All right, so that's the NEEP. There's the Stanford Achievement Test, or STAT-10. And this one is a little older. It dates back to 1923, and it offers individual profile sheets, class grouping sheets, grade grouping sheets, school system grouping sheets. If you look at pages 163 and 164, you can see what some of these reports look like. This has good validity, so that's great. We want that in things where we are going to be making big decisions, right? Like whether to hold someone back a grade or whether to deny a school funding. So The subtests here, their reliability is really good too. Their internal consistency is like the 0.8s to the 0.9s, which we would say is good or excellent. And it's a good test, basically. That's great. We want that again if we're going to be making decisions based on it. Alrighty, then there's the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Again, goes back quite a bit, dates to 1935. It's geared for grades K through 8, so not just 4th and 8th. Okay, and there are subtests depending on the grade level, looking at a whole host of things: language, reading, vocab, listening, word analysis, math, social studies, science. And then there's also a subtest of sources of information. So like, can they use a map? Can they use a dictionary? There's good content validity and the reliability, very similar to the SAT-10, the middle 0.8s to low 0.9s. It also correlates well with other general tests of cognitive abilities, which is excellent because that allows you to compare their scores on this to those other tests pretty easily. Then there's the MAT, the Metropolitan Achievement Test, also came out in the 30s. You can kind of see like around the 20s or the 30s is when we were like, we should start figuring out how people are doing, right? We learned about how, you know, a little bit before that they were doing this in France, and then it came over here. So this one's K through 12. Subjects here are broad: reading, language arts, math, science, social studies. This one has not only multiple choice, but also open-ended items, which distinguishes it from some of these other ones. Those open-ended items are then gone in and scored on a 0 to 3 basis. There's some criticism of how like the norming groups are looked at. They think they're too heavily weighted for rural classrooms and underrepresent urban classrooms. And you can imagine the racial connotations related to that, right? If you're looking at more rural, typically in the US, that means you're looking mostly at white folks, right? And if you're missing urban, you're missing people of color. It does have good reliability and validity, but with that cultural criticism, you know, I would certainly choose one of these other ones over it. Were I the one who got to make these choices? I'm not, obviously. Alrighty. Diagnostic testing. These are the types of tests that would be given by a school psychologist. So everything we just talked about could be administered by the teacher or a volunteer, right? They just have to be able to read the directions to the kids, essentially. These have to be given by someone who does have training. So different laws that we've talked about previously that give accommodations for students with learning disabilities or attentional disorders, make these tests very crucial. Like, you need to have these types of tests in order to figure out what's going on, in order to helpfully plan something that will help the student. So the law says that any individual ages 3 through 21, so like for some of you that's still carries, right? Ages 3 through 21 who are suspected of having a disability that interferes with learning has the right to be tested at the school system's expense. The school system has to pay for it. So because contracting out to people can be quite pricey, most schools have done this by hiring school psychologists to administer them. These are used in the development of individualized education plans, or IEPs. And what the laws say is that these individuals have a right to education within the least restricted environment. So if someone has dyslexia, it doesn't mean you throw them in the special ed class, right? You keep them in the normal class if they can keep up, and you make accommodations, like giving them time and a half on a test, for example. Alrighty, the RAT is the one thing I'm disappointed by that I don't have here. That's one of the tests I carried in my last day I was on campus. So I can't actually show you the RAT, but I'll maybe try to bring it in next week. It's in our copy room. So this is a screening test for learning problems. This is pretty quick. If I recall, the RAT takes a half hour or less to give. And it assesses basic reading, spelling, arithmetic, and sentence comprehension. And it basically tries to get around, you know, if you are having like learning disability problems, you know, you should still be able to do these things. So they're asked to do things like read words. This is a list of the words. You hand it to them, and then they have to read these words aloud. So it starts with words like lame, and it goes up to words like oligarchy. Okay, so like they get harder. And one of the really interesting things about reading ability is that it is one of the best correlates, predictors of intelligence over time. So like, let's say you get in an auto accident, get a head injury. If they can give you a reading test, they can sort of estimate what your IQ would have been before that accident, which is really cool. You also have kids spell words and do math problems, and then you give them a sentence and they provide the missing word. Just to show you how quickly things progress. The last time I gave a RAT was in 2009, and we were on the RAT 3, and now they're on the RAT 5. So as I was updating this PowerPoint the other day, I had to go in and find some new diagrams of what this test look like now. You can give just spelling and math, and you can give those in a group setting. So you can test a bunch of kids at once. You have to do the reading and sentence comprehension individually because it's oral. It works for ages 5 to 75. So that's the vast majority of people who'd be in an educational setting. Again, it does have excellent reliability and validity. And if you look at table 8.1 in your book on page 167, it shows you what the like raw scores are, how they convert to standard scores, what you sort of look at for percentile rank. So it's a lot of the stuff we've been talking about with our stats. So it's really cool to kind of see it all together. So, and there are multiple forms. So if you look on that table, it says this is the score summary for the blue test form. This is really nice because that means you can then give them, I believe the other one is the green test form, and you can repeat the testing without having practice effects. So very cool. All right, the Key Math 3, or the Key Math Diagnostic Test, assesses students' knowledge and understanding of basic math. It provides diagnostic to teachers. I do not have a Key Math 3. I have some of these other things that I'll show you in a minute. So this is K through 9, or it can actually go up to 21 years of age based on cognitive ability. It is essentially learning problems in math. So this type of learning problem is called dyscalculia. I'll throw that in the chat so you know how that's spelled. Okay, and it like dyslexia means like trouble reading. Dyscalculia means trouble calculating, trouble with math. This takes 30 to 90 minutes. So you'd only want to give it if you suspect a math problem, if you just suspect dyscalculia. And reliability, very good, excellent validity as well. And again, if you look in your book on page 171 this time, they have an example of what the key math would look like. So having people putting physical chips into a box to do problems, for example. So
Can I say something?
Sure, go ahead, Troy.
You're saying the test that only takes about 30 minutes. I knew somebody that had, how do you pronounce quanta or dyslexia with numbers?
Dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia. And she said that after a certain amount of time, the numbers would just fall off the page. So, you know, I don't know what it is about that. It's the same thing with dyslexia.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And that's one of the reasons there's this big range of 30 to 90 is all of these tests have what are called discontinue rules. So if the person just starts to get a lot wrong, you stop rather than frustrating them by making them keep going.
Right, because stress makes it worse.
Right, exactly. And that's why there are different types of things you have them do too. You know, things with physical things, not just doing things on paper, things out loud as well. So you can really get down to which part of it is what the struggle for them. But yeah, you're right on, Troy, that it is really hard for people who are, you know, trying to do this. And so one of the things that's really important when you're assessing people is to make sure they have adequate breaks, to make sure that, you know, you are not overloading them, because then you won't get an accurate assessment of what they can actually do, right? You're only getting an accurate assessment of what they can do in a really stressed out situation. Yeah, good point. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
All right, I do have a pie. Ta-da! And actually, let me make myself big so that you guys can see it better. And so this is the Peabody, I'm gonna make sure I get it right, Individual Achievement Test. I have a pie at R, we're higher up now. Okay, so comes with a book of plates. So these are things you show to them, okay? And so they would see this. And I don't know if that's backwards for you guys or not, but it's different pronunciations of the word glass. And so you see this part, which I don't know if you'll be able to see that in detail, but this gives you your description. So you say glass, the window is made of glass, glass. And then they're supposed to tell you which is the proper spelling, which in this case is 3, right? But all of these kind of make sense phonetically. That some people might think it's glass with only one S, and some people might think it's glash, right? Things along those lines. So anytime you're giving one of these that has these little things, they're really cleverly designed. So I'm not gonna be able to show it because I don't have a table right here, but this is meant to just sit open so I don't have to hold it up. And again, like the participants would just see the stimulus, and then you on the other side get to see your directions, and it tells you exactly what to say, which is really cool. Other subtest that they have on here is a couple here. You have them like copy a sentence from here. And here's one where you give them a picture and you say, look at this picture. What I want you to do is to write a story about it. Just write an interesting story about the people and things in the picture. Use your imagination. You may look at the picture as often as you like, but you only have 20 minutes to write your story. The neatness of your handwriting isn't very important here, but write clearly enough so that I can read it. Also, be careful about grammar and punctuation. Before you start writing, take a little time to think about what you are going to say, then write it in the booklet. I can give you more paper to write on if you need it. Do you have any questions? So I was not making that up. That's all right here. I just have to read that to them. Right, and so we're getting at things like written expression. Other things that are in this packet. This is about general knowledge. So there are instructions for you to read as the examiner. You and I are going to spend a little time together working on some questions and problems. Many young people find them interesting and enjoy working on them. God, that just made me think of the meme of Steve Buscemi, where it's like, hello, fellow kids, the young people. Anyway, that's why this one's out of date. So these are things like, where are your fingers? Show them to me. You know, and they start easy and then they get much harder. Like, tell me the name of a continent where you could see lions, giraffes, and elephants roaming in the wild. And we're looking for Africa. Why are surgical instruments put in high pressure steam cylinders before they're used in an operation? To sterilize them, right? It's along those lines. And again, like those questions are right there. And then it also has examples of correct answers and incorrect answers. Here are ones where you might show them some pictures. And then you point to the E. It tells me in the directions, point to the E. Find one like this down here, right? And those get more complex, obviously, as well. So some other examples here. So there's a reading comprehension one. So you show them these and they have to read them out loud. So the crows are not frightened by the scarecrow in the cornfield. And then you might ask them follow-up questions about some of them. And there are like little, I would always call them comic strips, right? And you, after you read one of these, you ask them to like point to the picture or put the pictures in order. That's a subtest at the waist as well, actually. And last one here, this one is for the math. So something like, look at this picture. It shows bats and bowls. Point in a sweeping motion to the response area. It actually says in a sweeping motion. I love psychological instructions for things. Point to the number down here that shows how many balls there are altogether. So I don't know how clearly you all can see it, but there are 2, 4, 6. So you would want them to point to number 6. And it tells you that the correct response is in box 2. So again, the other thing you get whenever you are giving an assessment, you'll have a manual that tells you all of the reliability and validity information. Lots of tables and charts. And sometimes there's like a supplementary manual as well, which there is here. And then you'll also have the form you use to record all their responses. Okay. And some of these like are things that they're going to write on, like here's where you have them do the written expression, write their essay. And things along those lines. So that is a PIAT. That gives you an idea of what one of these tests might look like. Alrighty, back to screen sharing. Okay. I think I might have a Wyatt at school. It's made by the same people who make the Wechsler intelligence test. And what's really cool is if you get scores on the, like one of the Wechsler intelligence tests, and then you get scores on the Wyatt, which is the Wechsler individual achievement test, you can compare them. It actually tells you how to compare them. And that helps you find out, according to their intelligence level, which should tell you their general ability or potential to do something, how are they doing on these tests that measure like more what you would do in school. And so it can be pretty helpful for that. So here are all of the subtests on this. The Wyatt is a little bit longer. And this is a nice, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. This is a nice presentation that kind of walks you through the revisions to the most recent Wyatt, if anyone's like really interested in the Wyatt. But again, you can see there are different manuals and stimuli to use with the person. This is all of the different subtests. Anything with a star was new to the most recent revision. And you can see that, you know, different things go together to make composite scores of like their ability to do oral language, their total reading score, things like written expression, or their ability to do mathematics. All right, Woodcock Johnson is another example. This is designed to facilitate a broad range of tailored and comprehensive assessments. I have part of a Woodcock Johnson here. So you can use this to diagnose learning disabilities, determine learning variation, all kinds of that stuff. So just, this is really similar to the PIAT. You can probably see that, how similar it looks. Like there's a no, find a no. And so honestly, which one would you choose to use? The one that your company bought, right? In a lot of cases. Or if you are fortunate enough to have all of them available to you, you would choose the one that seems most tailored to what you anticipate the problem is that person might have, or maybe best tailored to their age level or things like that. But yeah, here we go. What is the sum of the prime numbers that are greater than 3 and less than 28? Right, and you would give them scratch paper, and the statement is also written out here. So some math things. Again, this is made to prop up. Very helpful. So the participants would see this, and then you as the examiner sees this. So I don't have the whole test with me, but it would also have manuals and answer sheets and all that good stuff. This can help with IEPs. It can assess growth over time. So like the one I just showed you is form C. So there's also a form A and B. So just like the rat, there are different forms. You can give it multiple times. Obviously, you can provide psychometric training to people using it, and then provide guidance in educational settings. And this is also used in research. Now we're going to talk about readiness testing, which we talked about in passing on Wednesday. And these can be helpful in deciding whether a child is ready to move on to the next grade level. We often see these in kindergarten or first grade. But as we talked about the other day, you can see these in other grades as well. So there are some problems. Kids' cognitive functioning changes really quickly. Their growth is almost exponential. Like they're gonna, from this week to next week, they're gonna just give you an example. This summer, my daughter, who had never really been interested in doing puzzles, all of a sudden was putting together 48-piece puzzles on her own. And I was like, what? Right? But like, she just like saw other kids doing them at summer camp and she wanted to do them. And now she just jets and does them, right? So, it can change that rapidly over the course of weeks. Cross-cultural biases do exist for some of these tests. And particularly when English is not their first language, kids won't do as well, which makes sense, right? So we need to be aware of these. And this is why a lot of school districts will now do like ESL programs or things like that to make sure we're not placing kids in special education classes who actually just, need to learn English a little bit. So the kindergarten readiness test is used to determine if a kid's ready to start kindergarten. You can give this anytime between ages 4 and 6. You can see all of the skills it covers. And I like that it's, it's not all what we think of as school things, right? There's like fine motor abilities and just sensory perception areas. The problem with this test is there is some questionable reliability and validity, which means probably not the best to give. There is the Metropolitan Readiness Test, and this can do preschoolers, kindergartners, or first graders. So level 1 assesses literacy development for preschoolers and beginning kindergartners. So sort of like, do they understand things? And then level 2 assesses reading and math for kindergarten to beginning of first graders. This is kind of long for a kiddo to sit, right? 80 to 100 minutes. The composite reliability is excellent, but as you can see, the reliability of the subtests, not great, right? 0.53, not what we're looking for if we're looking at something clinically. So because of that, people question its validity. Here's another example, the Gessel, sure, school readiness test. It looks at personal and social skills, neurological and motor growth, language development, and adaptive behavior. So it's not looking at skills as much as, I guess, like social things, social skills. Arnold Gessel, who developed it, spent years examining the normal development of children. And as far as Gessel himself was concerned, achievement was more than just how you score on a reading or math test, which is why he came up with this test. This is another one where the reliability and validity are questionable. However, some people just like don't put as much time and effort into assessing that. would not recommend. You should do a good assessment.
I have a question.
Sure.
So if the reliability and validity is so questionable, why are they still able to use and administer these tests?
Really good question. Because there are no laws regulating how reliable or valid a test has to be for you to give it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for example, over fall break, the assignment y'all are going to do is going to be taking something like the Myers-Briggs, which a lot of businesses still use to hire people. There's no validity to that. There's no reliability. It's a personality test, but people get different scores every time, which is not a personality. But because there are no laws saying here are the minimum thresholds, they can just use it.
Yeah, people game the system all the time when it comes to that.
Definitely. Okay, so now we're going to talk about cognitive ability tests. So this is what's an individual capable of doing. I'm going to blow my nose real quick here. I'm almost done with this, but I'm going to mute so that y'all don't get it in your... Alrighty. So this is not like an intelligence test. This is more like, it's kind of like an achievement test, but instead of like specific skills, it's looking at broad content areas. So this is good for identifying students not succeeding in school due to more than just learning disabilities. This will get at things like motivational issues, problems at home, self-esteem issues that get in the way. So these can be really good. So the OSAT, or the Otis Lenin School Ability Test, K through 12, assesses abstract thinking and reasoning skills, and it has verbal and nonverbal sections. You can give this in a large group format, so that makes it efficient. It takes about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. There's an achievement/ability index that basically tells us how students are doing compared to their potential. However, as you can see, their definition of content validity is like a little hilarious. Each user must determine if the content fits the population they are testing. Okay, right? And the reliability, like some of the tests we just talked about, excellent for the composite scores, not as good for subtests. Subtests are harder because they tend to be pretty short. So that can affect your ability to get good reliability. All right, next thing is the COG-AT. I thought I had one of these, but I do not. So the COG-AT is constructed with two models of intelligence. So it's got Vernon's hierarchy of intelligence, and then Cattell's idea of intelligence is that there are two types, which are fluid, what can you do in the moment, and crystallized, what can you do with what you've already learned. So there's verbal, quantitative, nonverbal, and a composite score. It's kind of similar to DIQs, but for whatever reason, they decided to use a standard deviation of 16 instead of 15, just to be super confusing. Good reliability here, 0.8s, 0.9s. This is used to measure future things. So, you know, it has good concurrent validity, but it's like, how do we determine in the moment how well it predicts, right? People need to do long-term research with it. Okay, then we get into some of these college and grad school admission tests, like the ACT. This is one of the more popular ones. I liked the ACT better than the SAT. I just thought it like actually measured what I knew as opposed to the SAT measuring how well I took the test. I'm just looking up what they say the ACT stands for now. At one point, they just decided like SAT didn't stand for anything. And it looks like they may have decided that for the ACT too, because I don't see the acronym spelled out anywhere. Cool. So it's just the ACT. I don't understand. Marketing is funny. The SAT changed names, like it was always SAT, but they changed what it meant like 3 times while I was in high school. Like it was the Scholastic Achievement Test, and then it was the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and then they're like, oh, it's just the SAT. So there's 4 skill areas here: English, math, reading, and science. Scoring range from 1 to 36 for high school students. The mean for college-bound students is about 21. Very good reliability of 0.96. As we talked about earlier with the SAT, the predictive validity of these is not great. And that's partially because of the ceiling effect, right? If we're only taking people who are, let's say, scoring 21 and above, there's probably a little bit lower, right? Because they're taking people who are below the mean. Then it's going to be hard to get enough variability to really predict something like GPA well, right? If everyone's scores are kind of clumped together. You know, and then if you take schools with higher admission standards, right, that's gonna, that even more. The SAT has reading, math, and writing. Scores are this old familiar 200 to 800. And they can compare means to a 1990 group whose mean was at 500. They create a percentile score that compares examinees with people who took it the last 3 years. The writing is hand scored by evaluators. Reliability is really good here. In terms of validity, these, like, if we were doing just like a correlational study, these would be decent correlations. Are they the level we want to predict college grades if we are making admissions decisions based on this? I don't think so, right? So now again, we get a lot of problems where the SAT has a lot of cultural biases, like we talked about. There are people who just don't test well, and we're kicking them out before we really look at the rest of their stuff, right? So not great. Okay, so for those of you who were here when we started, I'm going to circle back to the GRE now, because for whatever reason, I had left my slides in the wrong place. So we talked about this at the beginning of class. It will be on the recording. Here is how the GRE is scored now. So the mean is somewhere around 150. I personally still can't wrap my head around what that means, just because when I took the GRE, it was on the SAT scoring scale, where, like, you know, kind of something above 600 was good. So sure, if you get above the mean, you're probably doing great, right? And there are subject tests, and depending on the grad school, they may or may not require this. And correlations for both the overall GRE and the subject tests are pretty low. And again, because for grad school, you're hitting a higher ceiling effect, right? You've got the people who are motivated enough to apply for grad school, encouraged by their faculty members to apply for grad school, right? So now we have this, like, really high threshold. So when you've already got those people, you're going to have very small variability in those GRE scores. The other thing I should tell you is, at least when I was in grad school, it was rare for someone not to get an A in a class. Like, a B was a bad grade. So, like, you also don't have variability in grades. There is the Miller analogy test. I've literally never seen any place take this, but it exists. And so this is almost like an undergrad version of the LSAT, to be perfectly honest. Again, I've never seen a college or university request this. Certainly we don't at BWU. There are other things that you have to take depending on the type of grad school you might want to go to, right? So if you want to go to law school, you've got to take the LSAT. And that does reading comprehension, analytical reasoning, logical reasoning, and a writing sample. Again, predictive validity, not great, because you're taking the best of the best at this point. The MCAT is for med school, and this assesses more of the specific things you'll be using, which is nice. So physical sciences, biosciences, verbal reasoning, writing. I believe there's also a section on ethics now, which is great, because we want ethical doctors, right? Again, scores that don't necessarily make sense, right? 1 to 15, or the writing is scored J through T. I don't know, man. Who comes up with this stuff, right? It doesn't always make sense. There does seem to be some predictive validity, but again, you've already got high achieving people with good grades applying to med school, so that's going to limit your variability. All right, the last thing I will talk about here is the role of helpers in the assessment of educational ability. So there are lots of different people. So you can have school counselors, school psychologists, people who are learning disability specialists, school social workers. And so these people can all be members of the school special education team. And school psychologists and learning disability specialists are the ones who would do these assessments. They are the testing experts. So they would test for learning problems, attentional problems. Clinical and counseling psychologists would do additional assessments or might act as a second opinion. School counselors often only test, the only testing expert permanently in-house for school. So they can like consult with teachers and disaggregate data to find students with learning problems. But sometimes we may need to consult with people, or sometimes students can have like a backlog. So for example, through a professional organization I'm part of in Virginia, I met a school psychologist who is in charge of testing for the entire county in Western Virginia. So every elementary, every middle, every high school, just her, right? So depending on your resources, this might be limited. So because of that, you know, sometimes schools have people who just like help score the tests and things along those lines, but it should be someone who's licensed, who is a school psychologist, school counselor, one of these people who has this formal training, right, who is making the decisions. So, okay, we're testing educational ability. Is that good or bad? Well, as we mentioned, teachers can be forced to teach the tests. They're not allowed to be as creative as a result. Some people also argue that testing leads to labeling. As soon as we label a kid with a problem, right, we create some stigma. And some tests are a mechanism for majority children to move ahead and to keep minority children down, whether that is majority by socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, right? And again, they're not built that way. They were built that way, but unintentionally, if that makes sense. That doesn't make it any better. But like the person wasn't like, you know, let's keep the minorities down. There have been people in the past who've done that, but it's just they didn't norm it properly, which we need to fix. And some people argue testing causes competition and peer pressure. But there are some upsides. So tests allow us to identify areas that are performing poorly and hopefully give them more resources and help them to do better. And then we identify those kids with learning problems and we can give them those accommodations to make the playing field level. Testing allows a child to be accurately placed in a grade level, and it can help children identify what they're good at or weak areas that they can focus on, improve upon, etc. All righty, so on Monday, here, I'll leave it in this so you can see what I'm saying. On Monday, we will start by doing a group assignment where you all will do some practice GRE problems and comment on those. And then my goal is to find us a computer lab to go to for the second half of class to do some SPSS stuff. I will send you an email one way or the other, but I may need folks to bring their laptops in if possible. But that's like the first thing I'm gonna do when we're done here today. So take care of yourselves. Thank you to those of you who came today. I appreciate it. I think people are probably just over Zoom. So have a good weekend, and I will see you in person in RuPaul on Monday.